Troy, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be on.
So great to have you. And what I'm curious about a lot of things, but what I'm most curious about to start is how your philosophies changed on health and well-being from your days of being professional quarterback in the NFL at the peak of your career and where you are today. And walk us through your evolution because I know it has been an evolution.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. It's a good question. Goes back, I've been a lifelong athlete, of course, since I was a kid. I started taking my being in good shape and condition going back to when I was probably about 10 years old. But let's move forward through college. And then once I got to the Dallas Cowboys, health to me was really all from a physical realm. It was about lifting weights and getting stronger and doing agility drills to improve foot quickness and conditioning and cardiovascular and all those things. And that that took me until I was about 26 years old, and then we had a tough loss back when I was playing to the 49ers in the NFC Championship game back in 1994, and after that game, I just decided, I'm gonna really commit myself to getting in the best possible shape that I can get in, and that's when I started jogging on a regular basis. Started paying a lot more attention to my diet. I wasn't prior to that, up until I was about 26, I was eating pizza and hamburgers and, a lot of fast foods and things like that, and didn't really think much of it. And because of my metabolism and my age, it didn't really impact me, at least as best I could tell. So I started down that path in 94 of paying a little bit more attention to nutrition, but still was not nearly as aware of it all as I've become here in the last few years. And so I went through the rest of my playing career with that same mentality, kind of sticking to the same principles, my same conditioning and things of that nature. I hired a trainer after I retired about 5 years into retirement, and he put me on a program that really kind of changed my body. And I had back issues when I was playing. So this began to really help me. And it wasn't until probably about 2.5 years ago that I ratcheted up my diet even more so once I started following Mark Hyman on Instagram. And now I'm a disciple of the pegan diet. I really everything he preaches, I'm a disciple of. And I've noticed huge gains, and the biggest of that being on the nutritional side in what I'm eating. And it's impacted every single element of my being, quite honestly.
Huge fan of Mark. Mark's a dear friend, and some of our listeners may know this, but Mark attended we used to do this event called Revitalize until, the event stopped, obviously, but they're coming back. But we did an event called Revitalize in 2014, and I was interviewing Mark, and he coined the term pegan diet at our event, and it stuck. And he wrote a book about it. And, I think it's so attractive because we tend to live in a world where diets are mutually exclusive, where it's, oh, you're vegan, you're paleo. But
Right.
Mark said, no, it's pegan. Like it's going to be plant-based, plant-forward diet, very little meat, cut out the grains, refined carbs, and so forth, and it's more inclusive and it works.
Yeah, it's worked for me, and I tried the vegan diet briefly, but I've always found that protein was good for me. Animal protein, I felt like my body responded favorably to that over the years. I just kind of went based on how I felt. So I thought that his diet really hit the sweet spot for me. And then it really made a lot more sense once you take into consideration the source of the food that you're getting. And so it answered a lot of questions for me. I've read a couple of his books, and it's been extremely enlightening for me. And so now, like you just said, heavy with vegetables, more so than I've ever been before. But I complement that with grass fed beef or pasture raised chicken. And it's worked really well for me. I'm reminded, I say this, that a buddy of mine that I used to play ball with told me that you never hear young people say they're in the best shape of their life. You only hear people that are old say that. Well, I'm 55 years old, and I will tell you, I feel like I'm in the best shape of my life in every way, mentally, physically, emotionally. And a big part of that, I've never met Dr. Mark Hyman in person, but he's been a big reason as to why I feel as good as I feel.
Well, after this call, we'll talk. I'm happy to introduce you if you've never met him.
Yeah, I would love to. We've texted a little bit, but I've not actually met him.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So, in terms of, you mentioned grass-fed beef. I'm curious with the pegan diet, what works for you in terms of frequency of meat? Is it, once a week? Is it once a month? Like, how do you think about meat consumption in general? What works for you?
Well, I'll have, I would say once a day. I eat, whether it's chicken or beef, I eat a lot of fish, but I have a protein source, one of those three, pretty much well, for lunch or dinner. And I do the intermittent fasting, which he's a proponent of. So I have a big lunch at noon, eat dinner at 5. I have a guy who comes in and does meal prep for me, and he does organic granola that I'll have. It's just kind of something I'll have about 8 o'clock at night before I go to bed. I make sure and get my rest as best I can. But that's pretty much what I eat during the course of a day. And I don't feel hungry the times that I'm not eating. It's really pretty surprising that for someone my size, I don't feel deprived. I don't feel hunger when I'm, sticking to that intermittent fasting.
One of my favorite lines from Mark is, "You can't exercise your way out of a bad diet,"
Yeah.
and you clearly have a strong foundation there. You also mentioned that kind of expanded your view on what health and wellness look like. You talked about mental, physical, spiritual. Can you talk a little bit about the spiritual component and how you've evolved there? A couple things I've read in prepping for this interview. One, you're a fan of meditation, and two, you're a big fan of Michael Singer's Untethered Soul, where if I were to do a poll of former NFL players, my guess is that book would not be
Ha.
top of the polling.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that I started trying to read the book. It was recommended to me a couple years ago, actually about 4 years ago. And I started in on it and it just didn't really resonate with me. The time for me wasn't then. And I read the first few chapters or so and just got a little bit bored with it and put it down and didn't pick it up again. And then I ran into a few other people who recommended the book again, and I kind of thought, yeah, I don't know. I just didn't really hit me. And then for whatever reason, I decided to pick it up. And I'd been meditating for close to about 7 years at that time. I'd been to some retreats and I was meditating because I had heard that it was so good for you. But I don't know that I was really realizing the benefits of meditation, but I continued to do it. And it wasn't until I read The Untethered Soul the second time that I then picked it up and it just everything started to click and a lot of doors began to be unlocked. And for the first time, I felt that I now know why I'm meditating. I wasn't before I was just meditating. And now I felt like I was meditating to to live a better life, to be more mindful, to take the meditation practice and apply it then to everyday living. And before I would just meditate and then I would be done with it and then move through my day and really not give any of it much more consideration. But that book just hit me and resonated with me in a way that has been life changing. And so I've kind of tried to get my hands on as much of his stuff and many others, quite honestly, but I try to get my hands on as much of his stuff as I possibly can. And I've learned that exercising the mind is much like I had done my whole life as an athlete and exercising my body and muscles and things of that nature. I reckon I'm a big disciple of Mark Hyman's and I'm a big disciple of The Untethered Soul. And I've told a lot of people about that book and a lot of them have come back to me with the same conclusions on how much it's helped them.
So you said it was life changing. Does an example come to mind? Something you were doing pre Untethered Soul and what that looked like post Untethered Soul.
I think the biggest thing is been just one is not having I have I don't have expectations, I think is one of the biggest takeaways for me. Or the other part of that is if I have a reaction to something, really questioning why I'm reacting the way that I am or why I'm feeling the emotion that I'm feeling and questioning it. Not judging it, but just questioning it and sitting with it. And I think that through that process, it's allowed me to work through a lot of trauma that, quite honestly, I never really thought that I had. I've learned that we all have it, but I grew up with a father who was pretty demanding, and I've realized that being able to sit with my emotions and these energies that I would feel as an athlete and that I would feel even after I got done playing, being able to sit with those emotions and question it and be curious about it has been liberating in a lot of ways. A lot of moments in my life or situations to where I would feel uneasy or I would feel anxious, I've been able to kind of work through those things. And now I don't feel as anxious in those same moments. And it's something I continue to work on. And it's something that I've talked to my girls about. They're 19 and 20 years old, and knowing that, like I said, that we all have it, and the sooner and the earlier they can understand it, the better served they'll be. I'm glad I discovered it when I did. I wish I had found it back when I was in my 30s.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like more professional athletes are opening up to mindfulness and meditation. You think it would have made you a better player?
It's a great question. It would have made me a different player. I know that. It would have made me a different leader. I've had this conversation with some of my close teammates, and I've gone on some of their podcasts, and they've talked about how demanding I was as a quarterback. And I'll be honest, in some ways, I'm not proud of that because I feel that's a different person than I am now. And so in those podcasts, I've said, yeah, I'm not real thrilled about that. I probably should apologize about some of those things. And they said, what are you talking about? We wouldn't have accomplished what we accomplished if you hadn't have been the way you were. And so I don't know the answer to that part. There's a big part of me that thinks we would have still accomplished what we accomplished. I would have just done it a little bit differently. I don't think I would have been any less competitive or demanding. I just would have presented it a little bit differently or framed it differently. So that's something that I've wrestled with, as to what kind of player would I have been had I have discovered it a lot sooner.
You mentioned your accomplishments, and in prepping for this interview, I found an interview you did with Texas Monthly Magazine back in 1998, and said on the night of that first Super Bowl victory, you delayed attending a party with your teammates, instead ordering beer from room service and sitting alone in your hotel room for a couple hours. And this is the quote from you. I kept thinking back to the time when I was a teenager, how I thought that all my problems in life would be solved at the moment I turned 16 and was able to get a car. And then here I was at the top of my professional football game, and I found myself thinking, now what? Now what? When I read this, I I I was blown away. I said to myself, "This is all about enjoying the journey." What's your take looking at this quote from 24 years ago?
I remember the quote well. I remember the moment well, and I remember back how I felt when I was 16. I mean, I'd always thought prior to turning 16 that anyone who had a driver's license and could drive, how could they ever have another problem in their life? That's like the greatest. You could drive a car. I mean, how good is that? And then, of course, we all turned 16. We realized that we still have problems. And it was a reminder to me when we won our first Super Bowl, because as the number one overall pick in the 1989 draft, you're drafted where you are to win a world championship for your organization. And there's a part of me that felt that once I do that, then my athletic life will be complete. And we won a Super Bowl. In fact, we won 3 Super Bowls, and yet at the end of my career, I was booed off the field. So, I mean, I think that, there was a game where I was booed. So you realize, I think it all kind of puts it into perspective. And to your point, and what I've learned, not just through the Untethered Soul, but what I've learned over the last few years as my practice in meditation and mindfulness and remaining present has grown, is that happiness isn't something you acquire. Happiness isn't something you necessarily achieve. Happiness is just being in the moment and appreciating where you are at that moment in time. And, when you're young, there's a feeling, and we've all heard it, we see it all through social media, that, hey, once this happens, then I'll be happy. Once I achieve this, then I'll be happy. Once the kids grow up, then I'll be able to do the things that I want to do. And then how much happier will I be? All those things. And then life passes you by because there's always that next step that you're waiting for that's going to make you happy. And so I have found contentment, quite honestly, for the longest time for me was a 4-letter word, but it's not any longer. You know, I'm still very motivated. I'm still very driven, but I find real contentment in my life. I have stillness in my life, and I think that's probably the best word that I can use when I talk about my practice in meditation and what it's provided me. It's given me stillness, and that's something that was elusive for me, and so it's provided a calm that I'm happy. And I don't know, I've always thought I was happy, but I think reflecting back, maybe I wasn't, but I have true happiness and peace in my life. And it's just a great time where I'm at right now and wouldn't trade any of it for anything.
And your meditation practice, what does that look like on a daily basis?
Yeah. So I do it first thing in the morning and I make a point. One thing I don't do is I don't set an alarm unless I just absolutely have to be up for some reason. I don't set an alarm and I'll wake up anywhere between 6 and 7 o'clock. And I don't because I just have realized how important sleep is. I make sleep a real priority. So as soon as I wake up, I then meditate for 30 minutes and I do that each day. And if for some reason, timing wise, if I were to wake up at 7 o'clock because of what my schedule is, that trying to fit in 30 minutes of meditation would be tough, then I will set an alarm. And, I make that a priority as well. So I just do it and I don't do, I try to remain, I try to do the meditational practices during the course of a day as I'm doing chores or doing things and, using that as a opportunity to be mindful, but actually sitting and meditating, I do that for 30 minutes each morning.
And for that morning meditation, is there a specific practice? Is it mantra based or mindfulness based or like which specific practice? I'm curious.
I've done it's really more mindfulness based and I guess
Right.
focusing on my breath as much as anything. And I've tried the guided meditations and those are great, but I just tend to like the silence as much as anything. And then there was a period where I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but there was a period where I thought, well, if you had thoughts, that wasn't good. And then you go back to your breath. Where I'm at now, and tell me if you agree or disagree, but is that I'm okay having thoughts as long as I'm aware I'm having the thoughts. As long as I'm mindful of the thoughts that I'm having, then I just kind of observe them and get curious about why I'm thinking about those things, but I don't get lost in the thought.
I Well said. I think anyone who claims they can truly empty their mind,
Yeah.
maybe it's a Buddhist monk sitting on top of a mountain in the Himalayas, but
Yeah.
it's almost impossible. So I think the idea of being self-aware and saying, "There's a thought. Why is it here? Okay, thought. Try
Right.
to let it go. Let's try to get back. Here's another
Yeah.
thought." It's just like awareness.
Yep.
Building off this idea of happiness and something you have this stillness and awareness and something I'm curious about, whether it's a professional athlete or a celebrity or an influencer on social media. I've read so many pieces that their identity is wrapped up. Their identity, their self-worth is wrapped up in that notoriety, those likes, that applause, and that if that is your vehicle for happiness, you're gonna really end up struggling. And I'm
Yeah.
curious your perspective, having played professional football, and I'm sure you keep in touch with people you played with. Why do you think it is that some people really struggle post playing and others seem to thrive?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think some of it, probably a lot of it, has to do with the personality of the person, and there's some that kind of feed off of that. There's others that don't necessarily require it. I don't know that I know the answer to that totally. I will say that for me, I always wanted to be a professional athlete, but it wasn't necessarily because I wanted fame. And maybe that's good for me, my post career, but also I do know what you're saying that there's a lot of athletes that get out of the game and are lost for a while, and some are lost for a long time. I don't know how much of that is because of the notoriety of being a professional athlete, or as much as it is just that being a professional athlete is so intense to do it at the level that we did it, and then what exactly replaces that? And there's a lot that goes into being a part of a professional football team. And you've got a group of players that all have a common goal, and the workouts are intense, and the commitment is significant, and the achievement when it's accomplished is great. And there's a lot of attention that comes with that. There's a lot of rewards that come with that and benefits that come from that. And then trying to replicate that or find something that can fill that void is really hard for some. For me, yeah, I think it could have been hard, but I was fortunate in that I was able to move from the playing field right into the broadcast booth that immediately created this challenge for me. And I think even though I don't feel that I'm one who seeks the spotlight, it's continued to give me a platform and give me a visibility on a national scale that I didn't just have to put everything away that I had been as a professional quarterback. I still have some level of relevance. So I think that's helped me. And whereas others aren't. I mean, so that's why I've been able to kind of work through that. But I know others aren't quite as fortunate in finding something that really kind of captures their attention and requires them to learn something new and invigorates them and all the things that go with that. I was able to do that. So I'm very blessed because of it.
Well, I also think culturally we tend to put people in boxes. Okay, you're Troy Aikman, you're a Hall of Fame NFL quarterback, or you're Troy Aikman, I'm a broadcaster, or whatever it might be. I think we just tend to do that culturally. I'm curious for you specifically. It seems like you don't, I would guess you don't think of yourself as just, I'm Troy Aikman, Hall of Fame quarterback. You're doing, we're going to talk about some of your other works. How do you think of yourself at this stage in your life and your career?
Yeah, well, you're right. I don't think of myself as even Troy Aikman, the former NFL quarterback. I just, my football career was really important to me. I'm very proud of it. Like I said earlier, it was a dream of mine to be a professional athlete, and I was able to realize that dream and accomplished a lot. And so I don't minimize any of that, but that was a long time ago. And I just don't want to be content. I hope that when my days come to an end, that there's more that's said about me than, he won 3 Super Bowls and played for the Dallas Cowboys. That, I would like to have at the top of that list that he was a great father and raised 2 really great girls. That's what's most important to me. So even now, I know I'm most known for my football career, and I get asked still a lot of questions about my playing days. I don't know that those days, I don't know that those conversations will ever come to an end, but I do get a little bored talking about them, because I've done it for a really long time. So I view me now as I don't want to be defined by what I do. I want to be defined by who I am and what I am. Although most people, other than those that are close to me, they don't get to see that part of me, So I think that's what happens in that too.
So let me ask you this: you're for any football fan or just you're pretty visible. You're a big guy. You 6'4", 6'3". Like
Six four,
if
yeah.
I see Troy Aikman walking down the street, I'm gonna say that's Troy Aikman. And so let's help some people out. So if someone wants to come up to you and start a conversation, sounds like they shouldn't ask you about your playing days. What would you rather have a conversation about with someone?
Oh, well, the conversation that you and I are having is interesting to me. I mean, I think the conversations regarding health and wellness, mindfulness, nutrition, I think those conversations about how can we be better people are engaging conversations for me, as opposed to, hey, tell me what it was like in that championship game back in 1995. You know what I mean? But I get it that people don't know all that much about. I think, like you said, coming on, that you thought, wow, you're one of the last people that I would think would be coming on this podcast, I think that you speak the sentiments of of a lot of America.
I think that there's some other people further down the list. Maybe Leon
Okay.
Lett would be further down the list, or, there's some other pro athletes I could put further down, but so, in terms of health and wellness, we're talking about mindfulness, meditation. You mentioned, not only exercising the body, but exercising the brain. And so I'd be remiss not to ask about, traumatic brain injury, CTE. It's a real problem. We know a lot more today than we did when you were playing. And so, how do you think about that?
I don't give it a lot of thought. I'd be dishonest if I didn't say I don't give it some thought, because I do, and I do mostly when I'm around former players that I know are having some issues. And I did have a number of concussions. I think the number was 7 or 8. I think other than 2, they were relatively minor. I say that with an asterisk because I know that any type of head injury is not insignificant. But one of the things that I think broadcasting has allowed me to do is kind of keep a check on where I'm at with that, because there's so much recall that's required that it helps in that after a ball game where I'm able to recall information or players or whatever it might be, that I can say, hey, I feel like I'm doing fine. So I do monitor it, so to speak. I've had exams, I've had tests, and my tests have been really positive. They've come a long way from, like you said, from back when I played. But yeah, I'm hopeful that as I continue to age, that does not become an issue for me. And so far at 55, it has not. But I know there's others that I played with and against that are even younger than I am that are having real issues. So it's something that the NFL continues to address, but it's a physical sport. There's going to continue to be head injuries as we've seen. And the impact of that, I think, is still a bit of an unknown that they're still discovering.
Yeah, and I think if you had a problem, I think from my understanding, you probably know by now. And two, you mentioned, being in the broadcast booth and recall. Your brain's a muscle. You got to exercise it,
Yeah.
and not that like recall exercises are gonna save you from cognitive decline, but there a lot of people believe that you have to put your brain to work. And if your brain was perfectly 100% healthy and you just sat on the couch all day and watch TV, you probably start to deteriorate.
And I believe, lifestyle, of course, plays into that as well. I think exercise helps. I think nutrition helps. I think, there's a lot of life choices I think that we can all take on that either can help with cognitive function or can hurt.
I'm curious, like, is there any, obviously being in the broadcast booth, is there anything else you do specifically for cognitive health?
No, but if I read something that Dr. Mark Hyman suggests, I'll be doing it. I'll tell you.
Well, you said you're having your wild salmon, your omega threes,
That's
so
right.
that's a good one.
Yep. My list of supplements each morning is growing. I mean, it's just I'm gonna. There's gonna be a time I'm not gonna be able to hold it all in one hand.
We'll have to send you some of ours. We'll offline about after the
That'd be
show.
great.
We'll help you condense. I'm the
Okay.
same way. I get to a place where I get 28 vials of blood twice a year. I got the Aura, I got the Whoop. I'm not 55, I'm 47, but and my girls also are younger than yours. So we have a 3-year-old and 5-year-old. So I want to be around for a
Yeah.
while and play with them. And so I
Sure.
really think long and hard about health span. So with that said, with me with supplements, I get to this point where sometimes they'll go a little too far where, 15 capsules turns into 30. Then I'm like, all right, we gotta pare this down. We gotta pare this down. We could consolidate over here. So but after the show, we'll have to get you some of ours to try out. If you could go back in time when you were playing, look, we had an author, Dan Pink, on here. He wrote a book about the power of regrets and that regrets are good. This idea of, no regrets is not healthy to some degree. If you could go back in time, and maybe regrets a strong word, if you could go back in time and maybe give yourself advice in those early playing days under the lens of the context of this show, we're talking about nutrition, health and wellness. If you could go back in time in your playing days and give yourself some health and wellness advice, what would that be?
Oh man. Well, first of all, I would say that I want to read this book. I think that's an interesting premise that regrets are good. I don't disagree, but I'd like to dive a little deeper into that.
Well, he says,
So,
I'll make a note. There's a difference. It's this idea of having regret, understanding what happened, being aware, and taking
and
a
learning
learning
from,
from it and
yeah,
making a change versus dwelling on it and beating yourself up. And,
yeah.
it's like this idea of recognizing, being aware, change.
Yeah, so I think you touched on it in that explanation that I think is what I would do because I've learned it. I've learned it here in the last few years. I think I've been, I don't like the word, but I think it's applicable to me. I think I'd been a perfectionist and I think it's what drove me. But I don't think that's good. I don't think that's a positive. I don't, I think few people do these days, but back then, like I said, I didn't view myself that way. But what I do know now is that I do give myself grace. I expected myself to be perfect in everything. So that's a high bar, and it's not realistic. And so even if it meant that I was doing something that I hadn't, it's one thing if my expectation was to be perfect throwing a football or to be a perfect quarterback, even though that's not attainable either. But what it turned into was no matter what it was that I was doing, if I was giving a speech or if I was, whatever I was doing, I expected myself to be great at it. And now I feel like I give myself grace. It's okay not to be great. It's okay not to be, and I don't say that apologetically. I don't say that then that, hey, it's okay just to be okay and not give all your effort, so there's a difference, as you know. But I've now learned that you give it your best, you put all your effort and energy into it. And if you come up short or you don't quite meet your expectations, learn from it and try to be better, but don't beat yourself up over it. And so I think I probably beat myself up too much when as an athlete and back when I was playing.
And in terms of trying to do your best, something that's always top of mind for me, as I mentioned, I've got two girls. They're much younger than yours. Yours are on their way to becoming women. Any advice for a girl dad like me in terms of raising two
Oh,
girls?
girl dads are that's the best. It's the best. I don't plan on having any more children, but if I did, I'd want them to be girls. I was a single father and read a lot of books and how then do you handle young girls when you're raising them. And what I learned is girls get their self-esteem and their confidence from their fathers, and which made me feel good, that I had that kind of influence on them and could help them in that way. And so I guess my advice, Jason, would be that what I tried to do was treat them the way that I would hope that their future boyfriend or future husband would treat them, or that would then become the expectation on their part, like, hey, this is how I deserve to be treated. And I remember I'm kind of old school. I'm old fashioned. I open doors for ladies. I let them walk in front. I don't ever walk in front of a lady, and all those things. And so when my girls were real young, I always opened their doors for them when we were getting in the car. And my youngest, Allie, it became kind of a game with her. She wanted to beat me to the car to open her own door. And I had to explain to her, look, dad opened your door and someday, you're going to be dating someone and they're going to open your door too. And that's just the way this works. And hopefully some of the things that I've tried to and how I've tried to treat them will carry over then in how they expect to be treated from their significant other in future years.
Yeah, it's, I think of you read the news and there's so many alarming statistics around girls,
Yeah,
self-harm, especially coming out of the pandemic, anxiety, and it's just ours are so young. I'm hoping things get a lot better, but
for sure.
always top of mind. How do you develop like a girl grows up to be a woman who's, confident, has self-esteem, self-aware, kind, who cares where they go to school? Obviously, we value school, but you want a kind, self-confident, self-aware kid.
Yeah, I feel I've been fortunate in a lot of ways, but with that, I feel that is my girls. I feel that they're good, kind, happy girls, but I will say that it's become harder. I think it's become, with your girls and the world we're in with social media, my girls deal with it and they dealt with it, but it's only becoming more of a factor in their lives. It's hard. I mean, it's hard to try to, I don't know, regulate that a little bit, but the expectation, I think, when we're only presenting our best self, that has a real impact on young people.
My wife, Colleen, who's my co-founder and co-CEO, we've been recently on Hulu watching the Kardashians, just trying to understand the phenomenon.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me know if you figure it out.
We're working on it. We're gonna have to get back to you
Okay.
on that one. So coming back full circle, we started in nutrition and your passion for health and wellness, and this has led to an exciting new venture. You launched a new beer, 8 Elite Lager. It's a great beer. I've had it. You guys were so kind to send me some, and I like a good beer. I don't drink nearly as much as I used to when I was younger. These days, one, maybe two after a meal or during a meal is fantastic. Back then, it would maybe be a case.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you and I, yeah, we're on parallel tracks.
But it's a great beer, and you think about health and wellness, nutrition, a lot of beers, I think a lot of people wanna have a drink here and there, and then there are a lot of crappy ingredients. You look at beers, there's high fructose corn syrup, it's just crap, and I saw the label, I was like, "Wow, this is actually a really good, clean label."
Yeah.
Troy and his team, they know what they're doing. So
Yeah.
let's talk about the beer.
Yeah. So what you said is exactly right. I met my partners through a mutual friend several years ago, one of whom, Doug Campbell, has had a career in the beer business. I was president of Almagang Brewery. And, we started talking about whether we wanted to make a beer. I worked at a distributorship back in college. I've endorsed on a national level beer, had a couple different campaigns. And I said, yeah, I mean, I like beer. I'm a beer guy. But we'd have to, in order to do it, I just think if you're going to do something, do it because you think you can do it better than what's on the market. And so that was kind of our mission. And over the course of 2.5 years, ultimately 8 was born. And you were right that, what makes 8 different than anything else that's on the market is we have no adjuncts and no fillers. We don't add any corn or rice or syrup or sugars. It's an all malt beer. And yet we're still at just 90 calories and 2.6 carbs. And those measurables are important to a lot of people. They're certainly important to me. I'm not going to stand here and say that beer is good for you, but 8 is a better for you beer for the reasons that I just said. 100% organic grains. We use antioxidants. So I do feel that we did it better than what's on the market. And I'm really proud of it. And so the people that we targeted with it are the people like myself and like yourself and, just about everybody who's listening to this podcast are people that take health and wellness seriously, that wake up each day and want to be better, a better version of themselves, or do something better than they had done it the day before, and put in the work and are willing to put in the time that's required. And then I believe balance is important. I think beer brings people together, and also beer is great to celebrate life's victories and those moments with family and friends. And so if you're one who enjoys beer and you want to be able to have a beer and not compromise all the work that's put in during the week, or whatever it is that's important to you, then I think 8 is a pretty good choice because of the fact that we don't have all the adjuncts and fillers that so many of these beers on the market do.
Well, it is a great choice. To reiterate, I was very impressed with the label, and it actually tastes really great. So
Thank you. Yeah.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Troy, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.